And welcome to The Issue Is. Our guest this week is one of the most talked about and controversial figures in all of America. John Bolton is the former ambassador to the UN. He served as President Trump's national security advisor for a remarkable 17 months. His book about that time, The Room Where It Happened, is one of the best-selling books in the entire country. John Bolton, welcome to The Issue Is, Mr. Ambassador, for the first time.
Well, thanks for having me. Glad to be with you.
All right, for those who haven't read the book, a lot of them have seen the public President Trump every day on TV, but most haven't met the private President Trump behind the scenes. So what's he actually like in the room where it happens?
Well, if possible, he's even more uninhibited in his behavior. And I think part of the difficulty that I try and recount in the book is keeping him on track to achieve objectives that he says he wants to achieve, obviously in my case in the national security field, which requires study of difficult subjects, requires identifying objectives, requires developing strategies to match resources with those objectives, and then carrying it through over a long period of time. That's not how I would characterize discussions whether in the Situation Room or in the Oval Office. It was more a matter of what happened on any given day. In fact, sometimes whether it was the morning or the afternoon. So it really caused me great concern for the security of the country when we didn't have the kind of concentrated attention to some of these very grave issues, and we ended up dealing with them in a kind of off-the-cuff, ad hoc manner, which I didn't think was most conducive to long-term success for America.
You know, his response to you has not been particularly nuanced. He's called you a liar, a disgruntled, boring fool, a dope. Knowing what you know now, do you regret working for him? If you could do it over again, would you still accept that job?
No, you know, that's sort of a typical response from the president. It's sadly juvenile, and I think demeans the office that he holds, but not worth responding to beyond that. I don't second guess the decision to go into the administration. I was not unaware of the criticisms of President Trump before I joined. I felt that it couldn't be as bad as some people said. I felt that I could make a contribution. I don't think my view in that sense was different from many others who also served in the administration. And the book is kind of a reflection of that my view was unwarranted. Let's put it that way.
So was it worse than people told you? And what would you say to people now who may be your friends who are considering working in this administration? Because somebody's got to be national security advisor, somebody's got to be in these important posts, and they are life or death positions in terms of, you know, the output for the country.
Right. Well, there's only 4 months left until the election, so if anybody's out of the government now, I wouldn't necessarily advise them to jump into the Trump administration here at this moment, see what happens in November. But I think you put your finger on something that's important that I think gets lost in the shuffle and lost in the debate about Trump himself, that there are, leaving me aside, there are a lot of people who want to do what they can for the country. It's an honor to serve really in any capacity, but particularly in a senior capacity. They hope that they can do good things in some areas where Trump hasn't paid much attention. I think you've got a lot of successful policies being implemented. But they do have the difficulty that if they thought they were going to work for a conservative Republican, when they got there, they found that's not who they were working for. I'm not saying Trump is a liberal, because he's not. He's just not anything. He's Donald Trump, and the philosophy at work is what's best for the political prospects of Donald Trump.
All right, you're obviously getting a lot of attention right now. We asked The Issue Is viewers for questions. The number one thing people asked is, why didn't you speak up sooner? Which I know you've been asked about 1,000 different times. Lin-Manuel Miranda, who wrote the song The Room Where It Happens in Hamilton, phrased it this way. He actually quoted his song, but changed the lyrics a little bit. He said, "Let me tell you what I wish to have known when I was young and dreamed of glory. You have no control who lives, who dies, who borrows your song title to write a cash-in book when they could have testified before Congress. Tells your story." Clearly some addition to the lyrics there. But why is Lin wrong? What do you say to those who say, you're just cashing in? You should have told this story when it was before Congress and you had an opportunity to make a difference when it comes to impeachment.
Sure. Look, if I were interested in cashing in, if that were my principal motivation, I never would have joined the government. I just would have stayed in the private sector. I was confronted when I resigned in September of 2019 with trying to get my life back in order after I left the White House. And when I came up for air a few weeks later, I found that the Democrats had already embarked on a highly partisan approach to impeachment. They had a very narrow focus. They were moved by the whistleblower whose identity I don't know. I didn't know then. I don't know now. And they only wanted to talk about Ukraine. So they were off and running. And, they never subpoenaed me. They never subpoenaed me. They subpoenaed my deputy national security advisor, and he was immediately directed by the White House not even to show up for testimony. So what he did was file a lawsuit to ask a judge to tell him, Congress tells me one thing, the president tells me another. What did the House advocates of impeachment do? They didn't want to wait for a judge to make a decision, which I think any citizen is entitled to. The House withdrew the subpoena to my deputy to moot the case out.
Well, the point that Congressman Schiff has made when we pressed him on that point on this show was that could take years in the courts. I mean, a point that you've made is that Watergate was a more bipartisan process than what we saw in the House. That is undeniably true. But I'm curious which Republican you think was interested in a bipartisan process of impeachment. Which Republican showed evidence that they were interested in impeaching the president?
Well, we don't know because they were pushed away by the Democrats. And I must say, on Schiff's point about how long it would take to go through the courts, you can ask for expedited consideration. And what was really on the Democrats' mind was that, I mean, heaven forbid, they didn't want the impeachment process to interfere with their party's presidential nomination race. Well, I'm sorry life is so inconvenient. But let me just finish the point, because I think this is important. When the Democrats gave up the subpoena in the House and the matter was sent to the Senate, and there was at that point no way we could get a judicial resolution, I said I would testify before the Senate. And the Senate voted they didn't want any witnesses. So when people say you should have testified, I don't know where I was supposed to go to do that. And it reflects a point the Democrats really failed to consider, that the White House argued that even if everything they believed about Ukraine was true, even if what they thought I was going to say was true, it did not rise to the level of an impeachable offense. So that my testimony, I think, would have gotten lost in the shuffle. And here's the fundamental mistake the House advocates made, and why I call it impeachment malpractice. Their whole concept was, as Nancy Pelosi put it, the president is forever impeached. And that would deter him from engaging in this kind of conduct again. But what they failed to understand was that the Senate acquitted the president. So that the result of the whole process, which they might have succeeded had they found more Republicans, was not to deter Trump from this objectionable conduct, but to encourage him. Exactly the opposite of what they said they were trying to do. That's failure or malpractice by anybody's definition.
So do you think if the Republicans in the House knew the facts that you laid out in this book at the time, that they would have wanted to go forward with a bipartisan effort to impeach the president?
We can't know the answer to that question.
Well, we could have if you would have brought it up at the time, right?
But we never had a chance. We never had a chance.
Why not then put it out in an op-ed? Why not put it out on Fox News or another place so that the information was out there? And I know to tell the story in a complete way in 500 pages.
Well, I write a lot of op-eds. I've got one today in the Wall Street Journal. It's 800 words long. The book is 500 pages long. And my decision really was that it may not take a village, but it does take a book to make sure that all the facts are out there. And I've laid the book out now in the middle of the presidential campaign. If this isn't a time for the people to consider the character and competence of the president, I don't know what is. And I'd make one final point there. It is ultimately not Congress that's the judge of the president. It is the people who are the judge of the president. and they will have a chance to take this into account in November.
And let's talk more about that presidential campaign. You've said that the country can survive one term of President Trump, but not necessarily two terms. You're implying that the president is an existential threat. Do you think that Joe Biden is an existential threat?
No, I wouldn't characterize it as the existential threat point. I think Trump can do enormous damage to the country that may not be repairable after two terms. I think our ability to snap back after one term is much more substantial. But I think ultimately the purpose of being in politics is philosophy. It's amazing enough for me that for the first time in my adult life, I'm not going to vote for the Republican nominee. But philosophically, I can't pull the lever for Joe Biden either. So I'm going to write in a Republican conservative leader yet to be determined. It's a kind of protest vote. I understand that, but that's what my conscience tells me to do.
And for people that say, like Carly Fiorina, a Republican, that it's binary, you got two choices in this country. You have enormous influence. I know you say that you live in Maryland, and so your vote doesn't necessarily matter when it comes to the Electoral College, but people are paying attention to what you say so closely right now, and you could help influence this election one way or another. And if you think the president is that much of a threat, why not vote for his opponent?
Well, I respect the people who are going to vote for Biden who are Republicans. I don't call their integrity into question. I don't think they should call mine into question. I was a vote for Trump in 2016, and now he'll get one less vote in Maryland and nationwide. And I think there are a lot of people who are in that situation who will either write in somebody or simply not vote at the presidential level. And
do you have a particular Republican in mind or somebody that you're especially impressed with that's coming up?
No, I haven't decided that yet. I wish there were some alternative. It's going to be a very unhappy election for me. If people have asked me, aren't you going to try and do something? And I can only say my plan is to hope for a miracle and to find out that there is some way to get a conservative Republican on the ballot who might be able to win. But I'm not waiting by the phone for that to happen. We continue with John Bolton, the former national security advisor, author of the wildly successful The Room Where It Happened. Mr. Ambassador, I'm curious if you would, since the book is called The Room Where It Happened, if you can take us inside the room where it happened with some of the best known leaders in the world, sort of a brief description of what they're like behind the scenes. And if you don't mind, if we start with Vladimir Putin, what's he like in the room where it happens? Well, I've known him, dealt with him for a long time in subordinate positions back in the Bush 41 administration. He's very knowledgeable, very tough. He knows what he thinks Russia's interests are. He pursues them relentlessly. He is fully prepared for meetings. So when I see him on the other side of the table from Donald Trump, I can tell you it is not a fair fight, and that's not good for America. What about Kim Jong Un, the leader of North Korea? You know, he's clearly totally in control of the country. He dominates the discussion on his side of the table. And he thought he could reach a deal with Trump. I think he believes if he only could have had Trump alone in the room by himself, he might have been able to do it in Hanoi. But it's, you know, he is a characteristic strongman. When the press came in, they asked Trump about a number of questions in Hanoi, and then they left. Trump said something like, well, do you have to put up with that in North Korea? And Kim looked at him like he was crazy and said, no, we don't have that problem. Xi Jinping, the leader of China. Again, somebody who is thoroughly in command of his brief. He knows what China's interests are. He pursues them. He's totally prepared for meetings. Typically, he will come in and read from index cards. But even when he puts the cards down, as Putin does, he knows exactly what he wants to do. I just feared every discussion, whether it was on the phone or in the room with Xi Jinping, because that wasn't a fair fight either. And now let's do something called the name game, where we talk about some of the people in the administration. This is, if you could, like one word or a very short phrase, because I know we're all short on time. I just want to get as much of that book in as we possibly can. So we begin with maybe one word that you think of for President Donald Trump. I think he's dangerous.
Vice President Mike Pence.
I have high regard for him.
Secretary of State Mike Pompeo.
Very disappointed in his performance.
Former UN Ambassador Nikki Haley.
I think she was over her head.
Former Defense Secretary Jim Mattis.
I think he was a patriot. I had a lot of disagreements with him. That's a more complicated answer, I'm afraid.
Jared Kushner, the president's son-in-law.
Second most powerful man in the White House.
Is that a good thing?
No, I don't think so.
Former President George W. Bush, your old boss.
I think he looks mighty good in retrospect.
Former President Barack Obama.
He led to the situation really where Trump was possible. And one of the reasons that I did support Trump in 2016 was I felt American position in the world had been eroded considerably under Obama.
And former Vice President Joe Biden.
I've known him for a long time. He'll be 4 more years of Obama at best.
Lastly, foreign policy obviously so important for you. What is the sort of most important threat that you see coming forward, and what can we do as a country to try to address it?
Look, I think the existential threat that we face in the 21st century is how to deal with an increasingly belligerent China, rearming, expanding its nuclear and ballistic missile forces, its blue water navy capabilities, largest cyber warfare program in the world, pushing against its neighbors, interfering in U.S. elections and politics, weaponizing commercial firms for espionage and other purposes. There's a long list of communist Chinese transgressions. We need to react to that. We need a strategic rethinking. I think it's actually underway. I think people realize that the foundations of our China policy of 40 years ago turned out to be wrong. Our predictions about Chinese behavior turned out to be wrong. I think this reassessment is also occurring in Europe, Japan, and elsewhere. But we need to do much better in dealing with China. It's not simply a commercial competitor. It's a real problem.
And you've also suggested that China, Russia, North Korea, and others are trying to interfere in our upcoming election. Can we stop that? What do we do to stop that?
Yes, I think we can. I think we did take steps, certainly in my tenure, that give us a stronger capability in cyberspace. I think the FBI, the intelligence community, the agencies which worry about this sort of thing, despite what the president says or doesn't say, I think they're working hard at it. But this is a battle that I think we're going to have for a long time. I think the authoritarian countries sense weaknesses in the democratic system. We haven't had to defend them in many ways like that before. But let's not forget, during the Cold War, the communists were very interested in taking control of Hollywood, movies, television. So now they're moving in cyberspace to do pretty much the same thing. We just can't let our guard down. This will be a long-term struggle.
And lastly, what do you see as your legacy?
Well, I tried to prevent bad deals from being made in the Trump administration. But for me, long term, my first involvement in politics when I was 15, handing out leaflets for Barry Goldwater, running for president. My opinion has been that philosophy is critical in helping provide for a strong America in a dangerous world. And if people remember me as somebody who pursued the philosophy vigorously, I think all the rest of it will take care of itself.
And the most important question of all, your book is called The Room Where It Happened. Did you watch Hamilton on Disney+?
I did not. I saw it in the theater, and I thought the phrase in the room or at the table was the basis for a book title for a long time.
Well, you got to watch it. It's pretty great. And we've got a little of The Room Where It Happened for you from Disney Plus as we say goodbye to you and we thank you. So let's play a little bit of that. If you want to dance, Mr. Ambassador, that's up to you. I know. I'm sure you're a lot of fun at parties. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you very much for the time. We appreciate it. Congratulations on the tremendous success with the book.
Thank you so much.
Ambassador John Bolton, thanks so much for watching. The Issue Is.